Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So first things first, just some announcements. Check out my personality story merch store, link in the description below, and I'm also going to be uploading more Patreon articles next week and starting a WordPress blog. So definitely, check them out in the description, links below. So, okay, let's get started on this topic that I guess virtually everyone is talking about. What a very famous topic of the year, coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. So this is the social commentary section of my channel, and today I'm going to talk about the things that I learned and the things that I think is important for you to know from the crisis. So just from observing the crisis and from seeing how it all unfold. Yes, a lot of people have made videos on it, but I think that I do have some important points that I want to touch on that can really get people to reflect on this whole thing and how, we can all use the time, maybe use your free time to watch this and to really learn something valuable in these trying times. So the first thing that I learned, and also a thing that I feel like a lot of people should know from this crisis is the importance of not jumping to conclusions based on headlines, based on news, even news reported to mainstream by mainstream media. So this is actually a topic that I have covered many times in my other videos. Do not trust everything that they say on the news. Okay, always maintain your own reservations, like have your own judgments, have your own critical thinking, put your own cap on, whatever it is called. Do not believe 100% whenever you see a headline, jump to conclusion and have this very emotional reaction, because chances are it may be misinformed and it may even turn out to be completely false. And I think that the coronavirus case is really an area that thoroughly shows, the evidence of that, because there were two cases that I wanted to talk about. One is the case of the woman eating the bats in Wuhan, which was completely false. It turned out to be a rumor that was spread very widely, both on the international stage and also in China itself. Like even today, Chinese people themselves believe that woman was eating a bat in Wuhan, and obviously a lot of foreigners also believe that. But this has already been debunked in a variety of articles from Foreign Policy, from BBC, that actually clarified that woman was not eating the bat in Wuhan. It was actually a bat in a Pacific island. So it was very far away from China, had no relation with the coronavirus. That was during a travel show where she was, showcasing the exotic diets of the people living on that island. So yes, bats are not actually a delicacy in China. It was not ever a delicacy in Wuhan especially. It's not a common food option for Chinese in general. So I'm not very sure. I mean, nowadays scientists cannot come to a conclusion how the spread began. I mean, some people pointed to the illegal wildlife trade and how, there could be potentially health inspection problems. And other people even said that virus might have come from a lab. And, both China and United States have accused each other of using that as a biological weapon. And honestly, both are just theories at this point. And so I'm not going to give you any conclusions based on that. And it really is up to us to do our own research and not to take everything at face value, and definitely not jump to conclusions, because I made that mistake as well when I was reading that news about the bat. And then, the consequences is people can get blamed for eating the bat when they actually never did. So that is actually a very tragic consequence. People can actually be subject to racist remarks based on a thing that never really happened in China. Another headline that went viral and was actually proven false was the Brazilian president supposedly contacting the virus and being tested positive, and this was totally ridiculous. Like, it was reported by mainstream news outlets, including all the well-known names in the United States, like CNN, this whole list of mainstream news outlets giving the wrong information in their headlines. And you know what? The funny thing is that they don't even bother to apologize. Now, that's why I sincerely doubt the integrity of journalism today. And I'm not saying this as like a joke or as a generalization. I mean, this has happened many times, and this is just a prime example that I can finally show people, this is a fact that they have made completely false, and they have reported it to the world. And it's like the lie has already made its rounds around the world, like before the truth can even put on its shoes. That old proverb totally worked for this case. So as usual, they did not apologize at all. And I read an article, the journalist even went on to criticize the Brazilian president for being rude to journalists when they themselves were the ones making such a grave mistake in their reporting. Like, shouldn't you be apologizing and taking responsibility for this mistake that you actually spread like a false rumor of his health around the world, instead of pointing fingers at him for being rude to you? I mean, honestly, a lot of these tactics, I've seen it so many times. When they report something wrong, they would usually point the finger at that person instead of pointing it back at themselves. I mean, the state of journalism today is just, it's bad. And obviously, these are not isolated cases. There has been many, many instances, innumerable instances, where very grave errors have been committed, and little to no apology has been made, and a lot of people went on just believing completely false things because of how people report it. And obviously, there's a lot of corporate agenda. I mean, journalists generally, for working for news outlets, they have to write in a certain angle that they are just paid to do, So definitely just be mindful of that. The second point that I want to make about this crisis is that we are really not all that different. And what I mean is that, when it comes to human reactions to the crisis, whether it's like the East and West, or, democracy and authoritarian regime, we are not that different. And why I say that is because, when in the beginning, when China was dealing with the crisis, the Chinese government was being ripped apart by the Western media for being slow in reactions. And yes, I actually agreed with them. I gave a lot of constructive criticism. I love giving that. I give constructive criticism to any government. So I'm not like, obviously always speaking out for this government or that. I just want to be fair. I want to say things as it is. So back then, when, people were saying China's reaction was slow, I actually agreed, because, there were doctors in China who were initially given a warning letter for spreading a rumor about the virus when they were actually telling the truth, but it was just not properly researched, so a lot of people didn't know that it was that serious. And so yes, definitely they could have reacted earlier, maybe as early as December and so on. However, later on I saw the same error in Western governments. So it's really not, I think it's essentially not exactly about authoritarian versus democracy. It's really about this human error. We as humans are just prone to being like a little too comfortable, and sometimes we don't react enough, and it can cause very serious consequences. I mean, you can really see it from like what happens to Italy and United States. I mean, I read this New York Times article, and it's an opinion piece, and I really agreed with it. It says, I'm going to link it down below as well. It says like China actually bought the West time because of the quarantine and the lockdown and everything. But the West squandered it. So obviously I'm referring to Western governments, not referring to the people. Definitely, because there was a period of time, if you remember, there was a period of time where cases in the West was growing very slowly because it was spreading throughout Asia. And so that was actually a great time for the Western governments to take precautions and to start testing people, and preparing the beds, because you cannot really wait until disaster strike for you to take action, because that has been proven many times to cause disasters. But unfortunately, the Western governments also made the same mistake as the Chinese government with a delayed reaction. And while Asia was scrambling to have like all the medical supplies, hospital beds, a lot of the Western cities were not really well prepared. They were, even down to the testing kits, for example, in the United States, it wasn't like, it wasn't even reliable. So in the beginning, a lot of people were not tested. And that's why, the numbers are soaring, because they just didn't know they had the virus. And so they went around, maybe on road trips, on holidays, and that actually caused a pandemic to break out. And, when it comes to replying to reporters, again, I feel like governments in general just like to lay the blame on others. I mean, yes, the Chinese government did kind of, try to divert our attention away by talking about, sometimes talking about the United States and how, they were being unfair. And then the same can be said about the United States, because Trump as well, like, he diverted our attention away from his own mistake, which is, the lack of testing kits. That's a very major problem with like the way that the United States dealt with the whole crisis. And he tried to divert our attention by talking about China and how China is to blame. But honestly, when it comes to this situation, you cannot really put all the responsibility on other governments, because at the end of the day, you are in charge of your own country and how you can prevent a crisis. And China already locked down and did all the quarantine stuff to be responsible for their area. So honestly, I think this is just not the good time to even point fingers, because it does not resolve anything. It just leads to more people feeling like hate, like for civilians who honestly are victims. So it really does not make sense for governments to point fingers, but that's what governments do, because they want to divert attention away from their own systemic errors and their own like judgment errors. And this can also be seen in many other countries like Iran, Italy, I mean just UK, a lot of poor judgment, a lot of slow reactions. It's not really a cultural difference anymore. It's just humans, having this defense and having this tendency to lay blame on others. And, realizing that, we all have this tendency, I think it can actually help us to understand each other better, I think governments in general have a lot to work on. Especially when it comes to trying times like this. So the third point I want to make is on this balance, this delicate balance between vigilance and calmness. So obviously at the start, a lot of governments wants to reassure people. They don't want people to panic, and that is understandable. But I think a balance has to be struck between like vigilance and calmness. Like, I don't think governments or anyone for the particular matter should be, giving out warnings in a very intimidating manner. I mean, scaring people off by saying, oh my God, we are all going to die, or this is like a very serious outbreak, 1 million people might die. I mean, yes, you can bring out those statistics, but I think that, when it comes to the beginning of a crisis, there is a way to find that sweet spot between vigilance and panic. I think that it is really important to try to find a balance. Definitely get prepared. I think people should be advised on staying away from crowded areas and staying home wherever possible from an early stage of the crisis. You don't have to wait until the crisis is already hitting the roof before you tell people to be mindful, and not go out when it's unnecessary. But at the same time, it's just the panic mode is also something that does not work, obviously, because it can lead to people not getting enough food or toilet supplies. And so just striking a balance, governments as well as people really need to strike a balance when it comes to making announcements about the illness and talking about precautions. And the last point is actually a very, very important point. It is really about the reflection on society and how we view work and school. So, with such a crisis, we actually have a lot of time on our hands to think about, alternatives to make money. And I think that this is something that, especially with the whole talk about AI and, how traditional careers are going to be impacted, this crisis just goes to show a lot more on this topic that, traditional careers nowadays is not enough anymore. I think that we are coming to a time where almost everyone should, find a side hustle. And I know this sounds challenging. Maybe some people are like, I never thought of that. But this crisis really shows that, just relying on one job, relying on one income stream is becoming obsolete. It's really becoming dangerous because even without this virus, artificial intelligence is also going to cause people, a massive amount of people, to lose jobs. And so if you are going to rely on your boss or an office to get money, once crisis like this happens, which right now you can already see the repercussions on small businesses, really the online market is a very, very important area to tap into. So if you are currently still relying on one income stream, consider diversifying. I think this is a great time to think about it, to explore different options, because you are at home most of the time, I assume. And so there's a lot of time to listen to podcasts and to watch videos and to explore different income streams and build one for yourself. You never know what's going to happen. People can get laid off due to, financial depression. People can get laid off because of many factors. And it is really something that is happening right now. And so maybe it is time for us to get prepared for the future with the time on our hands and to explore really online businesses and, alternative, streams of income and just finding a different way to express our strengths and passions. It doesn't always have to be from a traditional career. There are so many ways that you can do it now, and it is always better to get started anytime. Hopefully, you are using your time productively during a crisis like this, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.